Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's webinar. On behalf of Trustmark and Financial Market Association of Pakistan, FMA, we thank you all for joining today's webinar. The subject today is strategic market dynamics and what this here holds for Pakistan's financial market. Very interesting subject in this fast-moving environment. So Pakistan economy stands at a crucial inflection point. While inflation has begun to ease, it seems to be under control. FX market show relative calm. The fiscal environment, monetary stance, and capital market sentiments continue to evolve. Today, the market crossed 137 points, 1,000 points. Ab thoda sa kam ho gaya hai. So today's conversation will primarily unpack what 2025 till the end of this year as well as 2026 half year, because हमारे year end June hota hai, so let's keep that in mind. Could look like for financial professionals, investors, and institutions. So we need to cover that. Today's participants, panelists, we are very glad to have Mohammed Sohail with us. Sohail is the CEO of Topline Securities. He also sits on the board of Institute of Business Administration and the board of governors as the Alumni rep. So we look forward to young blood being there and some changes on IBA also. It's one of the most prestigious and pride of Pakistan, especially for Karachi. Sohail, obviously, most of you know, is a capital market expert with a strong institutional advisory background as well. He has Topline Securities. He's the CEO there. Is one of the top Pakistan's brokerage and research firms. And I'm sure you all have seen Sohail on the television also as an expert financial analyst. We would also have Maheen Rehman. I think Maheen is running a bit late. She's the CEO of InfraZamin Pakistan. She's got about 20 years of experience in asset management and development finance. InfraZamin is working on a lot of products to unlock infrastructure investment through blended financial solutions. So we'll talk about that also. Moving on, Sohail, welcome again. It's so good to see you
Thank you.
after a long
Thank
time.
you.
The first segment, जो हमारा है, it is post-budget. I've seen you on budget speech and the summary also. You were there while it was happening, and post-budget भी आपने अपने ख्यालात से का इजहार किया था. So please help us understand how this year's policy framework affects infrastructure investment and long-term financing. कोई चीदा points इस budget के हों जिसमें इसके ऊपर थोड़ा सा emphasis हुआ है या कोई change है in the policy framework जिससे infrastructure पे होगा. We can talk about PSDP and other options available to finance that or otherwise also. So over to you.
So thank you very much, Irtiza. Thank you, Trustmark and FMA for inviting me. And thank you for the introduction. देखिए, the budget को हम अलग ले लेते हैं, infrastructure को अलग ले लेते हैं. I think budget, as I mentioned earlier also, was not a surprising budget. This was more like a consolidation being continued. हमारी आपकी जिंदगी में ऐसा कभी कभार ही होता है कि current account surplus or primary surplus. So this is happening after almost 2 decades. So the effort of the budget seems to be to continue on that path, which in one sense is good, that the policymakers realize that they don't want to go for a super 6% plus growth trajectory, which could be dangerous considering our external situation. But on the flip side, this gradual growth has its own consequences because the lower middle class, the poor class is being severely affected by the erosion in purchasing power. Industrial growth is almost stagnant. So I think the budget overall was the continuation of the IMF-led consolidation thing. But I think, as you mentioned, that now relatively the fiscal space is with the government to spend on infrastructure. Contrary to perception, जो PSDP federal का कम है, that PSDP is just one small part of the total PSDP. So after this 13th amendment, Punjab and Sindh spends more than the federal government. But having said that, हमने एक चार्ट भी बनाया था over the last 10 years. So the development spending as a percentage of GDP is still one of the lowest in the last 8-10 years.
That's correct.
Which means that in order to streamline the economy, in order to bridge the fiscal deficit, the government is spending more on current expenditure and less on development expenditure. But because of this current account surplus, primary surplus, low inflation, so we expect some development activities both in the private sector and in the government sector happening this year. But again, those activities will not take the overall GDP growth to say 5-6%, but I think somewhere around 4% would be achievable.
Sure, thank you. So we are going through that consolidation of that 3% with the growth rate, population growth 2.5% to pretty much or more, वो offset ही हो जाता है अगर उस हिसाब से देखिए. Nevertheless, what you are saying is कि जो PSDP में पहले जो हमेशा हर साल कट हो जाता था because of other requirements, so that maybe if we have the right fiscal space जो कि इस साल लग रहा है वो उतना कट ना हो और provinces के अलग portion होता है. Maheen, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Assalamualaikum, क्या हाल चाल है? How are you doing? Good to see you.
So
Sohail, क्या हाल चाल?
I started and I shared the question that I had from you with Sohail since you came in a little late. So same question to you also. How do you see this infrastructure development and financing modes available with us? And the policy framework that affects the infrastructure and long-term financing. That's your area. That's why a quick comment on that.
Right. So I think, look at Pakistan right now, and we look at what's happening both regionally as well as globally on long-term financing. I think it's an interesting story at the moment where you're seeing Pakistan being more of a sea of calm in an ocean of tremendous uncertainty at this point in time, which is the world economy. And I think somehow the fact that we tend to remain somewhat isolated against global sort of cycles is actually benefited us quite tremendously in this round. Now, we've been through a tough time. We've seen the interest rates go high. We've seen us end up at near default. But at this point in time, I think the business confidence has certainly picked up. And with that, you're seeing far more interest from business owners in pursuing long-term investment opportunities. And by that, I don't mean real estate or the stock market. I mean specifically sort of infra-related or project-related investments, whether it comes in terms of business expansion or it comes in the form of looking at other markets for Pakistani products, right? So focused on either import substitution or export promotion. So I think it's quite an interesting time. I think the sustainability of this is, we've been here before, right? So we've been here on an up cycle and a down cycle. We tend to go through this every 2-3 years. So I think the question comes more around how long does this sustain, and can we sustain this in a more measured way over the next 5 to 10 years, right? So I think that's still, in my view, a bit of a question mark. But certainly confidence seems to have returned and things in Pakistan appear to be on the right track. Still, many challenges persist, but the noise at least seems to be less around negativity and trending more towards cautious positivity now.
Okay. So has the investor appetite shifted after 2025 budget announcements? What are those, if at all, some measures that have pushed them to go toward that? And the second question related is, how is blended finance models are in the current scenario assisting in this infrastructure development जो आप लोगों का InfraZamin is facilitating?
So when we talk about, address the first part first. So when we talk about investor appetite for longer term investments, and I'm talking about actual projects in the ground as being more infrastructure focused rather than investments in stock shares or T-bills, etc. So I think there has been, not particularly after the budget, but since I would say early this year and late last year, since the interest rates began to drop and feasibility began to be far more positive on longer term projects, that's where the interest, at least around expansions, around further development, around looking at import substitution, and other sort of infra-linked developments began to become, I would say, more feasible, and hence being taken up by those investors, right? So that's point one. On your point around blended finance, so there is always scope within the finance framework here to look at blended structures, but what's particularly working at the moment is two things. One is for newer technologies, such as those coming through in the circular economy, whether we're talking about recycling edible oil or recycling, other aspects of waste. That's something which has drawn a lot of interest from business owners willing to set up those plants. But interestingly enough, the financing of that has not come this, but come more from, I was snapped up very quickly in the last 6 to 8 months because they are commercially viable. They have a clear sort of export story, and they work very well from a circular economy development perspective. The other side, which we're seeing more often, where we're using the guarantees much more, is looking at climate and green finance related projects. Now that can range from anything to climate mitigation strategies, which we're seeing by using alternative energy, whether it's solar or wind, to also looking at green construction and smart construction, which looks to reduce energy consumption, as well as build certain resilience due to climate events. And those are very interesting for us in particular to look at, and would also be eligible in some part or form, perhaps in the future, on looking at carbon credits also in such projects. So I would say certainly yes. Certainly yes.
No,
There's been
please,
an improvement, yeah.
इसमें related question ये था, I mean, you spot on आजकल again Sohail was mentioning earlier also, we have some fiscal space जिसकी एक वजह हमारी थोड़ी सी export भी बढ़ी है, but exporter now are demanding more climate resilience, sustainable produce. तो exporters के ऊपर apart from just power generation, there are some other things जिसके लिए उनको financing की जरूरत होती है. Initially पहले जो textile वाले हमारे clients होते थे, उनके पास सिर्फ recycle your water waste and stuff like that होता था, अब उनकी requirements बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ गई हैं, especially by the Europeans and the US importers. So obviously that space, that capex that they require to do now is much more than before. I'm sure you guys are playing a role and can play a role, जैसे कि आपने जिक्र किया. So climate change is also buzzword. So much so हमारी जो latest amendment आई थी, 26th amendment, उसमें climate change has become a basic human rights right for Pakistanis. So that's interesting. So in this regard, what would make Pakistan's infrastructure space more attractive for global capital?
So I think okay, so the global capital story, in my view, especially in terms of development finance funds, is drying up, unfortunately, right? We are seeing, I would say, private sector interest would be more relevant at the moment. I do believe that when you look at governments that were heavily involved in such projects from a development finance lens, are seeing their budget cuts as well, right? So if you talk about the UK or you talk about European governments, or you talk about that aspect, there is a different shift there in terms of domestic policy and supporting development aid. Now there, I think that's a general negative for Pakistan, because the lack, we've seen what happened with US aid as a direct sort of, consequence of these changes. So I don't think that the reliance should really be on development aid flows or development finance flows that we expected in the past. I do think, however, that the market and the door is certainly opening up for domestic capital to step in. And, sort of that's where some of the risk mitigation can come from credit enhancement, which is what we do. But there are also a number of blended finance facilities and impact facilities that exist all over the world in various pockets of investors that you look at. But I do think that more and more we are going to have to rely on our own sources. And I think that's That's the challenge for us, that how do we convince local banks, local capital markets to come in and lend to those long-term infra projects when historically that lens or that avenue has been limited in its decision making. So again, the guarantees can play a piece, but I think largely when we talk about government policy, there is a need to look at incentivizing the private sector or incentivizing capital owners, in particular, what you're talking about banks or capital markets, into making those green or sustainable type investments. So at the moment, those incentives don't exist. They are there in a number of emerging markets in Asia.
Right.
But this is something that still needs to be taken up here, particularly if we are to start mobilizing and using our own capital resources more effectively.
That's interesting. Thank you so much for that, Maheen. And again, because usually the investment in infrastructure is medium to long term. So long term appetite being available obviously has a direct influence on how the interest rate is there in the country today. So that has been halved in the past few months. So that might create a little bit of market. But obviously, as you've mentioned rightly, you need to come up with more products and more interest from the private sector. Perhaps public-private partnerships also for some projects as well, but that is something all the provinces are looking at also. Moving on, we have our first poll for this segment. If we can put it up on the screen, Ikra. So the question is, what is the biggest barrier to infrastructure investment in Pakistan? And the options are high cost of capital, policy inconsistency, exchange rate risk, as well as institutional bottlenecks. Tough call, I must say. So host and panelists cannot vote. So Maheen and Sohail and myself, we cannot vote, but we can have something in our mind also. Let's think of what is most important, and let's see how the participants respond to that. By the way, when we talk of infrastructure investment, we are somehow, and again, just some supplemental question for you, Sohail, are we talking about real estate investment as such, or infrastructure for roads and bridges and energy and all that? How is this term loosely used?
I think broadly speaking, it includes, this is for me, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I
But
think,
before that, let me announce the result of this first poll. 70% said high cost of capital, 61% said policy inconsistency, 9% opted for exchange rate risk, and 13% for institutional bottlenecks. So we have a majority which is saying that policy consistency is the reason, which is the biggest barrier for infrastructure investment in Pakistan. So coming back, Sohail, how do we define infrastructure in normal terms, in capital markets and banking terms?
well, I think for capital markets, REITs is an important area, and I think over the last couple of years, many REIT companies they have started working on the projects, and hopefully we will be seeing new REITs coming to list. We already have 3, 4 listed REITs. We are working with a REIT called Image REIT, which have a building on Shara Fasil. They will be soon listing at the exchange. And I think there are a few other couple of other groups based in Punjab who got the REIT management license, and now they are structuring it to put one of their projects there. But unfortunately, in Pakistan, the awareness about REITs is very limited, except for the Dorman REIT. We don't think there are any active turnover seen in
Right.
those REITs. So I think we are far behind other large frontier and small emerging markets in this area, but at least the regulator has formed a structure whereby there are some tax incentives, whereby it's properly regulated. The trustee is there to look at the interest of the investors. So hopefully, maybe in the next 4-5 years, we'll see more REITs, both the
Traction
rental
towards
and the
REIT, yeah.
development coming to the market.
So again, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की जो हम लूजली बात करते हैं और जैसे आपने रीट का जिक्र किया, रीट इज प्राइमरीली अभी जितने प्रोजेक्ट्स हुए हैं विच इज आइदर कमर्शियल और रेजिडेंशियल, जिसमें इंडस्ट्रियल आगे नहीं है. सो देयर हैज टू बी अ मूव एंड आई नो फॉर अ फैक्ट दैट सम ऑफ द players are seriously looking at that to finance infrastructure. It's in industrial infrastructure through REIT. So as you said, let's see how it moves. Moving on to the next segment, which is market behavior and investor strategy. This is now the shift of focus towards capital market, hence towards you, Sohail. Uh, can you please help us make sense of the recent movements in equities as regards to interest rates and the investor psychology?
Okay, so this is a very difficult question, Irtiza. I think
It's a
in
broad question, but not difficult for you.
yeah, in the last, from the market from 40,000, it's now 140,000. So I think this sort of rally we have seen after 25 years. So the Gen Z have scaled, so this is the first time this has happened. And I'm pretty sure that this won't happen again in the next 10-15 years. So because of the dynamics of Pakistan and the boom bust cycle, the market has been very volatile. So I think there's a famous quote on the bull market, which I will read here, that says that bull markets are born on pessimism, grow on skepticism, mature on optimism, and die on euphoria. So Pakistan's 2-year rally is perfect mirror of that thing. So in 2022-23, I think majority of the people were very pessimist. The valuation were at 2 times price earning, which was lower than Ghana and Sri Lanka, which were at 4 times 5 times, and those two companies defaulted. Pakistan didn't default. So pessimism was at the extreme. Then comes the IMF program in June 2023. That was a short-term program. Since then, we went into the second phase, skepticism. So the market started improving. Then there were question marks on the sustainability, question marks on the new elections. Post-election, Pakistan had an IMF program. So the third, which John Templeton said, is mature and optimism. So we saw sense of optimism. So right now, if you look at this 4-stage, 4-phase bull market cycle, that includes pessimism, skepticism, maturity, and
Leading to euphoria now.
Yeah, so Pakistan is at the stage number 3. अच्छा ये तो था the John Templeton's view on the bull run. In Pakistan also we follow the same thing. In 2022-23, people were ignoring dividend yield also. So the bond yield was, say, 10-year bond was 15%. There were stocks that was giving you 20% return. So the question mark was कि क्या ये MCB का dividend maintain रहेगा, क्या फौजी का? So there was no need for such pessimism, but people were pessimistic. Then the second phase was dividend yield, any stock that pays you closer to T-bill or slightly higher than T-bill. And the third stage, now we have now started ignoring dividend yield, and now the focus has been on the price earning, which according to John Templeton is optimism. So we are in the optimism phase. और अगला फेज है वो 3 महीने के बाद आता है, 6 महीने के बाद आता है, बट वो आएगा, which is euphoria, where we will start looking at the property values in a company, where we start looking at SOTP. So I think we are in stage 3. A major part of the rally has gone. So Pakistan, in terms of price earning, बहुत ही volatile है, from a low of 2 in 2022 to a high of 12 in 2017. So we had an average PE of 7 times. And
Yeah.
right now, it's around closer to 7, maybe 6.7, 6.8.
6 point something, yeah.
So
That's
PE
right.
re-rating जो हमारा view था has almost over. So the whatever growth we will see going forward could be a factor of earnings growth. Okay, but again, as I mentioned कि हम थर्ड स्टेज में है, यूफोरिया जब होता है तो फिर लोगों को बहुत सारी चीजें नजर नहीं आती, so that can
जी।
take market to ridiculously high levels, but I think right now market rally is in a maturity phase.
So some related questions on that. First is, do you believe this recent rally is sustainable? As I said, we crossed 137,000 today, but thoda sa shayad kam aa gaya tha. Yeah, it's more sentiment driven, or it is, broadly sentiment driven. थोड़ी बहुत चीजें होती है. अब हमारी कुछ इंडिया के साथ कुछ चीज हुई तो market नीचे गई. That's understandable. But overall trajectory, and I've heard you before also, you have always said that this is still very lucrative and there is much more. So the question is it sustainable at this point in time? Will we be reaching euphoria, as you were saying, or just a sustainable slow growth?
Now, for instance, you are asking about the recent last couple of weeks, 20,000 rally. That is, I think, it has happened too early. Like the market has increased too fast and too early, and that's driven by few banking stocks. So I think I would be slightly cautious. Number one, in the medium term, if you ask me in the year's time or couple of years' time, if the economic consolidation IMF-led continues, we can get a 20%, 18% annualized return. But the recent rally is beyond my common sense because few shares have rallied 40-50% in the last couple of weeks just because of expectation of earnings or just because of certain
Well,
mutual funds
is
buying it.
inflation, is the inflation number and the interest rate direction a reason for this growth? And what is the capital rotation between equities and fixed income securities during this period? You're right. So some of the people might have moved from 22% मुझे PIB और T-bill में मिल रहा है, तो मैं क्यों equities में आऊंगा? तो compared to the last 6, 8, 10 months or
No,
so,
I think
is
the
there
last 2 year
rotation?
rally, the last two
Yeah.
year rally, inflation and interest rate have played a big role. Yes, no doubt. But अगर आप पिछले 15 दिन की रैली से पूछेंगे तो उसमें there is no role of interest rate and there is no role
Well,
of fixed income. Number one, whether the money has moved from fixed income to equity, contrary to perception, मेरे ख्याल में बहुत कम मूव हुआ है. ठीक है, जो फिक्स्ड
okay.
इनकम का होता है, जो ट्रस्ट है, जो फाउंडेशन है, वो फिक्स्ड इनकम में ही रहता है. मे बी इंडिविजुअल लेवल्स पे थोड़ा सा लिक्विडिटी आ जाती है. So I think interest rates and inflation are not a key market mover going forward. अगर interest rate आधा 1% कम भी हो जाता है, that doesn't affect the valuations. So जो market re-rating हुई है in the last 2 years has been led by lower interest rate, but the recent couple of weeks rally has nothing to do with interest rate or inflation.
And the last question in this regard is, foreign investors are watching Pakistan more closely in 2025. Is that true or not? या कुछ usual जो interest होता है वो है. In fact, correct me if I'm not wrong, ये जो foreign buying थी हमारी या foreign investment थी, वो net थोड़ी सी कमी हुई है पिछले दिनों में market से. Is that correct?
No, I think foreign investors have been net sellers. सिर्फ एक चीज चेंज ये हुई थी लास्ट ईयर, द पैसिव इन्वेस्टर बिकॉज ऑफ पाकिस्तान एक्सक्लूजन फ्रॉम की बेंचमार्क इंडिसेस लाइक FTSE, they sold out and active investors bought last year, although the net number was negative. This year also the net number is negative. So to
Right.
answer your question bluntly, I don't think in the near future कोई बहुत बड़ी foreign investment आने वाली है. उसमें पाकिस्तान is not related to Pakistan. If you look at Vietnam, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, जो सारी regional India, including India,
एक global एक
हाँ
segment,
ये
yeah.
global है. People feel that this US regime is uncertain. People feel that it's better to put money in tech companies that is giving good returns in US rather than
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's not Pakistan specific. The local market is purely driven by local liquidity.
So this is lovely, Sohail, ये जो आपने अभी कहा है, and again पहले माहीन ने जिक्र किया था, this is brilliant. I mean, you guys respectively are looking at and focusing on local market and local products and all that, and not relying too much on getting some sort of support. आ गई तो अच्छा है, ठीक है, we'll showcase Pakistan story to others. वो ठीक है, but reliance on how to maximize and optimize the capital within the country and to channelize that in the right areas. So this is, for me, a very interesting takeaway from this. So closing this segment, we'll put in our second poll, uh, which is, what's your expectation for the policy rate by December 2025? Choices are below 10%, or 10 to 11%, or 11 to 12%, or above 12% by December 2025. अब इसमें पेपर आउट नहीं करना, but Suhail, I would like to ask you, what do you see? Where is the interest rate heading? And Maheen
No, as
also
I
see.
mentioned, I think interest rate story is now almost over.
Yeah,
Whether it's 10 or 11, my choice would be 10 or 11. But 10 हो या 11 हो, मेरी जिंदगी पे या कोई इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट की जिंदगी पे फर्क नहीं पड़ता.
बहुत ज्यादा फर्क पड़ रहा
वो
है, लेकिन जब
ट्रेजरी हेड
22%
जो
था, जब
पांच
फर्क पड़ रहा था. हाँ.
जी वो जो ट्रेजरी हेड जो 5-10 बेसिस पॉइंट से वो अपना टारगेट पूरा कर लेता है या उसके लिए फर्क पड़ता हो. बट फॉर द ओवरऑल इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी स्टॉक मार्केट, it's 10 or
Right.
11 or 9.5 or 11.5 doesn't make any difference. If it is 5% will make a difference. If it is 18% will make a difference.
Correct. Let's see what our participants, we've got over 200 participants watching right now. So below 10% is 38%, and 10 and 11, जो कि अभी चल रहा है और expected is 57%. 11 to 12 is 4%, and nobody is expecting over 12%. So that's excellent, and this is something close to that we had in our mind and what Sohail said also. Thank you so much for that. Moving on, let's take a scenario. It's a scenario-based question for both of you. Let's consider inflation remains subdued, like it is right now, but remittances fall by 12%. Exports remain stagnant, and the PKR starts weakening. And SBP holds the rate at 11%, जो कि अभी poll से भी हमें majority का लगा है, and markets begin to flatten. So in this scenario, Maheen, considering this, how will the rating agencies react to the scenario in Pakistan के जो euro bonds और panda bonds के लिए कर रहे उसके ऊपर क्या effect पड़ेगा? Remittances coming down, exports being stagnant, inflation remaining at the same level, SBP holding the policy rate at 11%.
So you're suggesting that remittances are dropping over the next few
This is
months,
a
is that
scenario that we're looking at.
scenario? So I think देखिए remittances be a general negative, even if the state bank chooses to hold the policy rate steady at that point in time. I think that would have an immediate pressure on the rupee, which would, in my view, force the central bank to look at the both the currency and the interest rates as well. So I think remittances for us are a big sensitivity point. They are at an all-time high at the moment. And they have historically always continued to grow. So that's what effectively keeps our current account steady. And in the absence of meaningful FDI, which FDI being $4 or $5 billion a year, the remittance story is truly what keeps things together on this front. And if exports stagnate, don't grow, then again, you have that similar pressure on the current account. So the remittance story has to at least stay steady and marginally continue to move upwards to replace that lack of FDI and the lack of export growth that we're seeing. So in that situation, I don't think the state bank would have a choice. They would have to look at the policy rate to kind of support the exchange rate. And then, you would end up in that sort of difficult scenario again. So I think the question to be sort of looked at over the next few months is really, how do we sustain the current stability? Because that's always been the challenge, right? You get to, as Sohail pointed out, you get to optimism, and from optimism, frothy valuations, and that's really where the struggle begins for us. So I think the promises that are being made in terms of structural reform, tax reform, we've known that there's been a lot of pushback on the tax collection side and the enforcement side. I think the trick will be how can we diversify that? Can we at all? Wasn't certainly reflected in this budget. And then longer term, that revenue source, if that continues to come from one pocket or one or two pockets, then at that point that also runs out of that sustainability, right? So I think what you keep your eye on is really the structural reform that has been long promised in Pakistan, but very rarely delivered. And that is something that would move us out of this boom bust scenario that we're sitting in.
So keeping us in this scenario, you think that this might negatively affect Pakistan's rating and might have an effect on our Eurobonds and Panda bonds going forward if we have this
In the
flattened,
short,
stagnant.
in the short to medium term, no, but in the longer term, yes.
Okay, great. Now coming to you, Sohail, how in this scenario that I had mentioned, how might this affect portfolio allocation along across sectors? For example, banking, cement, and power. If not fertilizer, these three sectors, how would this scenario affect allocation of portfolio?
No, first of all, I think declining remittance and stagnant exports in isolation make no sense as far as you manage your current account deficit to say less than 1% of GDP. I don't think so there would be any effect. So anything less than 1% of GDP, because you know that the government is letting the rupee to fall. The rupee is down 3% against US dollar, and it's down around 10% against pound and euro. So which means the imports, they are trying to curtail imports. So as far as the imports are under control, and in spite of weaker remittances, if current account deficit is say $2-3 billion, and the government is doing the fiscal consolidation, I think there won't be any impact on the rating. There won't be any impact on the Eurobond yields, and I think there won't be any impact on the local interest rates also. So I think stability will continue. Regarding the
Okay.
allocation, I think that it's now the time to look beyond banks because the banks in some cases are now 8 to 10 times price earning. I was just looking at my Twitter post 2 years back. So the PE was 2 times, price to book was half times. Now the PE is at around 7 times, price to book at 1.5 times. So now we are moving closer to a very vibrant frontier market or a small emerging market in terms of banks valuation. And now the
Yeah,
time
yeah.
is to go for cyclicals. Like there are clear indication of gradual economic recovery. So the my preference would be to allocate more money towards cyclicals that includes automobiles, that includes pharmaceuticals, that includes
Right.
cements, that includes construction related things. So I think the alpha, the outperformance will more come in the near future from cyclicals rather than defensive sectors.
Okay. Perfect. So this concludes our third segment, and we have our next poll related to this segment, which is what would be the biggest market risk in this scenario that we shared? FX reserve depletion, loss of investor confidence, rising debt cost, or stagnant capital flows. You can pick one out of these four options. I think इसमें माहीन ने बहुत अच्छा point out किया था that there are some broader discussions on our governance as well and other areas जो कि फिलहाल इसके अंदर शामिल नहीं है but जैसे कि सुहेल आपने जिक्र किया कि इतनी resilience तो है कि थोड़ी बहुत change जो होती है so market is ready or either we have that cushion available as long as the current account is pretty much under control. So the focus is going forward should be whatever the scenario is थोड़ा बहुत 19-20 भी होता है is to maintain broadly a check on imports so that we have a little more resilience built to go through this consolidation phase, going towards a higher growth, more than 3.5% or whatever that we're looking at. So here's the result. 60% have opted for FX reserve depletion, 30% loss of investor confidence, 50% rising debt cost, and 10% on stagnant capital flows. So it's pretty much in line with what our discussion was going through, and I'm so glad to see that. And it's pretty much exactly what I had in mind. Also, um, let's give the now this platform to both of you, starting with Maheen. Uh, we will select a couple of questions, two, three questions from the uh, participants also. But before that, anything that we have missed till now in overall market dynamics environment that we are talking about, which is specific to with the financing of infrastructure projects or money available right now, or what are the future plans? If you can shed some light on that.
Sure, and I'm quite curious about the poll that was constructed around what are the challenges related to long-term infrastructure financing. So I actually think it's none of the options that were given. I think in my experience, the one thing that has sort of really held back what we finance long-term is actually project availability and our ability to both develop and bring to market projects that qualify as infrastructure and that qualify as long-term sort of sustainable projects. The interesting thing is there is a wide array of infra projects and that are classified as roads, right? So we like to build roads, but when it comes to sort of real long-term infrastructure, which could actually benefit the country, both in terms of climate change as well as long-term productivity, वो projects जो होते हैं ना बहुत मुश्किल से आते हैं सामने. And then when they do come, there is a tremendous challenge between federal government, provincial government, public sector, private sector as to who will actually own those projects and take them forward. I give you an example of irrigation, which is a nationwide issue because you have flood vulnerability everywhere, but no one party or province is willing to own that specifically, right? So actually, I would say the challenge is how do you bring the federal, provincial, and private parties on the same table to actually develop the long-term projects that we need, whether it's in irrigation or agriculture, as two sort of specific ones that we're seeing. I mean, we've partnered with the Sindh government as well in terms of developing a water desalination project for Karachi, which would tremendously improve the water supply specifically to the city. But just the challenges in bringing together the right bidders, the right technology into this is what is proving to be the challenge. The financing is there, but the project development itself is what is proving to be the challenge.
Fine, I think that's a very, very important aspect that you've highlighted, and that goes for the capital markets also. Not many IPOs coming in. Historically, वैसे भी अभी थोड़े कुछ दिनों में नजर आने लगे. Same with you. So it's a challenge to have, say, bankable or financeable projects available. Forget about the products. Products are there, can be developed, both Sharia compliant as well as conventional, if I understand what you're saying correctly. But yes, there's not enough work on highlighting or showcasing or approaching institutions like InfraZamin for that. We have a couple of questions. I would like to take that. A question ye hai कि what's the projection of US dollar till June 2026? Sohail, I would like you to answer to that, and then Maheen also. So nobody has a crystal ball, but looking at things, what do you have?
So our research team is expecting closer to 295, 300, and I think the government has also following a very slow and gradual path of adjusting the currency, because as a Pakistani, we had a gambling culture. Adjusting it 10 rupees overnight is dangerous than adjusting 10 rupees in 12 months. So I think this is the
295 to 300.
also,
That's slow.
And theoretically also the differential between the inflation and interest rate is also of 5-7%. So this is we are expecting.
Maheen, what does your crystal ball say? I'm saying because how much are you projecting in your projects? The interest rate.
Yeah, we're using about 300. We're using 300 at this stage, 1 year view, which is approximately 4 to 5% movement from say 285 today, because it has depreciated already in the open market to about 284, 285 to the AGA. So about we're looking at close to maybe 300 on our forward projections for next year.
That's close to what the Topline research says. A question for Sir Sohail: which way inflation and currency move, and how will it affect the market? I think ये broadly इसका छोटा सा जवाब सुहेल for you. Inflation or currency movement आपने थोड़ा बहुत जवाब दिया है, तो
I,
how will
I I
you define
think
the market?
uh, both are not key indicators in the short run because everybody expecting 3-4% devaluation, and everybody is expecting that the interest rate are very closer to the bottom or it has bottomed out. So these two factors, I don't think so, would be affecting the markets
Okay.
unless we see some extraordinary things happening, like currency going to 310 or currency going to 270. That would be the news for the market. Or as I mentioned, inflation coming to 6%, or interest rate coming to 6% or going to 14%. तो ये होने वाला नहीं है, तो जो होने वाला है are not the key indicators for the
Okay.
market
Another
going
question by Ali Athar. Given the economic environment, what PE multiple do you consider fair for the market, say by December 25 and December 26? इसका एक और सवाल इनका ज़िमनी है. What PE would qualify for market to be in euphoria?
So I think a good question. So our thinking is it's 7. So the average is 7. Our economic condition is average, which is not good over the last like 10 years. It's not very bad when we compare to last 10 years.
Right.
So right now we are standing where we are on an average in the last 10 years. We have good years, we have bad years. So P multiple should be around 7-ish. So right now it's around 6.6, 6.7. So as I mentioned earlier also, the P rating is almost over. It's again the earnings growth from company to company that matters. Okay, euphoria means around 10-ish. So
Okay.
anything beyond 10 means euphoria, you have to only sell.
Perfect.
And
So
there
I
are few
think these.
stocks very close to 10, by the way.
Do we have any more questions? The current state of stock market is like, okay, one more question. Current state of stock market level was potentially. So there's a question. The current surge of stock market is led by mostly penny share leading the volumes. What's the opinion of the panel on that?
No, I think that's not correct. That's not affecting the index, that's affecting the volumes, and that volumes again number of shares. The current rally is led by UBL Bank and MCB Bank and
UBL
Handel Bank. So it's only banks, banks and banks. So we are a banking country. So I think one thing I missed out just for the sake of the audience. The unique thing about this rally is the float. So there are hardly any IPOs. In fact, there are big delistings happening. Philip Morris is going, Exo and Park Suzuki delisted. There are very few right shares. The sponsors on their individual capacity, they have been net buyers over the last 2-3 years. The treasury stock market, which means companies buying their own shares. So one of the reason of this sharp rally is obviously the valuation, the economic stability, but it's also the um, limited float that's jacking up the prices. The second angle is taxation. This is a very new thing that there are two aspects. One is stock market is one of the most tax efficient investment. If you put your money in mutual fund, if you put your money in banks, that's has higher tax rate than in local market. On the flip side, there are many people who think that they should sell, but their tax liability is so huge because the market has tripled in the last 2 years. So the 15% gain tax and then 10% super tax is 25%. So there are many people who bought UBL and Bizan at a price of 70, 80 rupees. If they sell it now, the tax would be more than the price. So that is also restricting them to sell. So the demand supply dynamics, because of the limited share supply and because of restrictions, because of higher taxes, is also supporting this bull run. So this is a very unique thing that I have observed. I just thought to mention you for the audience.
So there is a question by Nadeem Elahi. Why is the flow of liquidity going into just banks 80% almost? So I think Sohail आपने इसका अभी जवाब दिया है कि पिछले दिनों जो रैली हुई है primarily led by UBL, HBL, and others. So,
नहीं,
but
I think
again,
इसका भी एक बड़ा अच्छा सवाल है that last 2 years or maybe last 4 5 years we have seen this family offices becoming very active.
that's
So
correct.
unlike a bank, unlike a mutual fund, एक family office है जिसके पास 5 billion है, he can buy 4 billion rupees worth of one stock.
Yeah,
If
one stop.
ठीक है, तो ना उसका रिडेम्पशन है, ना उसकी कंसंट्रेशन का इशू है, लेवरेज भी कर सकता है, 5 बिलियन का वो 10 बिलियन का भी खरीद सकता है. So these family offices are the market movers, unlike mutual funds or unlike. So they have taken huge positions in few stocks, and they believe वो कहते हैं कि diversification is the worst policy. If I am convinced that these two companies can do well, I'll put all my money in these two stocks. So that's why we have seen
It's
this
interesting. Yeah.
loop-sided. In the recent past, जो 20-25 हजार बढ़ी है, led by few banks, is mainly because of this theory that few family offices believe के उनका conviction दो stocks पे इतना अच्छा है that they don't follow the diversification strategy.
I think, if I can add to that,
Please.
beyond the fact of money chasing a few stocks, there are some fundamentals also that support the movement that we've seen in bank stocks, right? One is, 2 साल पहले आप देखो तो most of them 0.4, 0.5 price to book, meaning that they're worth half of their book values, which is a distressed valuation at best. And on the other side, you had them at very cheap PE multiples also, right? The performance of banks, you can argue that they didn't lend, but they certainly did lend to government at very high. So where you had ROEs maybe 3-4 years ago of 10 to 12% on banks, you had ROEs jump to about 23-24% plus in the last year or so, and sort of maxing out on profitability in 2024. So you ended up with even cheaper valuations around the end of last year. So naturally, you had to see some revision in the share price to accommodate that kind of performance on the P&L and balance sheet size, right? And I don't think there was any other sector in the market that matched the way the banks outperformed on profit as well as top line. So I think that certainly should be taken into consideration. And that's also one reason
Why there is so much focus on the banks primarily. That's correct. Another question for you, Maheen. What are the key economic indicators? Ansari is asking, what are the key economic indicators investors should watch closely in the current fiscal year? I mean, individual investors as well. So again, from your asset management experience and
Right.
your present
Sure.
capacity, how do you see that? Economic
Sure. So I
indicators?
think, look, what most investors end up focusing on is sort of interest rates and inflation, right? For me, those are lagging indicators of what's actually going on within the market, right? One key thing that we have to look out for, which is very indicative of when the boom turns into bust over here, is consumer discretionary numbers, right? So what do I mean by that? I mean, you start looking at car sales, you start looking at consumer goods sales. When those start to get to the point where they are shooting up to full capacity, for me, you are now ending up in a very bubble scenario, because it means that disposable incomes have increased. So far, this entire rally that we're seeing is not demand led, right? It is mostly a revaluation of multiples from stable economic environment. But actual जो हम जाते हैं ना कंजम्पशन की तरफ, जब import bill आपका बढ़ता है, cell phones आपके बढ़ जाते हैं, आपकी गाड़ियां बढ़ जाती हैं, वो
Motorcycle
zone
sales go up.
वो cycle जो होता है ना, वो deadly होता है. That gives you an indication of this is the top of the current cycle. And because from that point, all that demand-led push leads to higher inflation, higher interest rates, and then you begin to see that
Economy
economic
starts heating up at that time, consumption rate. Sohail, one question for you.
consumer is very critical when
Yeah.
evaluating our economy.
Sohail, why, this is an anonymous attendee asking, why energy sector is not rallying after news of circular debt?
Because that's still a news, that's not a reality. Maybe that's one reason. The other reason is majority of the energy companies are in government control. So we have seen what has happened to the government organization. So I think these are the two reasons, because the circular debt thing has yet not been done or implemented. And the other is obviously the management of private sector is more efficient, aggressive versus the government sector.
So just the last question, what sectors do you see having the highest growth potential in the PSX in the near term. I remember you mentioned about some, but again, if you can
Yeah, I
reinforce it.
mentioned cyclical, that includes cement, that includes
Automobiles, maybe?
automobile, that includes pharmaceutical, to some extent consumers. They have more chance to outperform in the next, say, 12 to 18 months than the typical ENPs or banks, or for that matter, fertilizer.
Okay, lovely. So now when we come towards the end, what is in, it's sort of a rapid fire round for both of you. And again, as it goes, ladies first, in one line, what's the most important signal to monitor in the half year of 2025?
So again, some revival on domestic demand is what I'd be looking for.
Sohail, you,
I
one
think the key
important signal.
indicator for the sentiments would be the PIA privatization. If that is done, I think that could be a big game changer in terms of sentiments.
Okay, lovely. So we move towards concluding this with a very uh, warm thank you to both of you. It has been very informative for me, and I'm sure for my participants also. Thank you for the engagement, for answering the questions. If I have missed something during this, so you both of you, please take a minute to elaborate or summarize today's topic, please. Mind starting with you.
I think we've covered quite a lot. I would simply say that we're in a generally a good place as far as Pakistan goes, a lot better than it has been in the past. I'd be really keen to see this go forward in terms of stability. And for that, obviously, the structural issues of taxation, privatization, etc., be very good to see those come through in the next 6 to 12 months. And also some general revival of consumer spending, which is incredibly low at the moment.
Sohail, how do you see the
I think
strategic
on the
market
economic
elements?
front, I think we are far better than what we were thinking last year in terms of consolidation. To some extent, we are closer to what we were in 2020, 2002, 3 in terms of the government structure, in terms of the technocrats, to some extent. So I think economy is in a far better position than what it used to be. However, the market has already reacted to that. So market looks forward. So market has reacted to these economic things, and market is slightly getting over optimistic. And as I mentioned, we are into a mature price earning phase, dividend phase is gone, investment phase is gone. So one should be very, very careful while selecting the stocks. Select on your own decisions rather than on the tips and what is being discussed in
ध्यान
this.
ध्यान की बजाय खुद ही अपना पोर्टफोलियो बनाने के ऊपर
हाँ,
सोचें.
और the other criteria is go to Sim Club, जहाँ पे वो बात हो रही है उसका आप उल्टा करें, then you are on the right.
Great. Thank you so much. I would like to wrap up today's session again, thanking first of all Financial Markets Association of Pakistan and Trustmark especially. Thank you to both of you, Maheen and Sohail, for taking up the time to share your thoughts with us. Participants will be given email certificates for their participation in this webinar, and we encourage the participants to go and check and tag and like Trustmark and Financial Market Association of Pakistan (FMA) websites, and look forward to seeing you again on next webinars. And it was absolute pleasure having you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ikra, would you like to take? Okay, ये तो चले गए.
वैसे मैंने लास्ट में पिक्चर ले ली थी.
Okay.
ठीक है. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Shukriya.
Thank you.
Bye.